The highway was a graveyard of steel and concrete, shrouded in an unrelenting darkness. The pale glow of my flashlight cut through the suffocating gloom, illuminating the twisted wreckage of cars stacked like corpses in a mass grave. Overhead, the remnants of an overpass loomed, cracked and splintered, threatening to collapse with every breath of wind. I tightened my grip on the chalk in my hand, drawing a shaky arrow on the nearest slab of concrete. "Mark your path," I told myself, the mantra playing on a loop in my head. The rules weren't just guidelines, they were survival. The air in the tunnel was thick, a choking mixture of mildew and rot that clung to my lungs. Every step echoed into the void, each crunch of debris beneath my boots feeling like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I come here for fuel, desperation forcing me into this labyrinth of the dead. The first sign of unease came in the form of faint scratches on the walls. They were erratic, almost frantic, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. My flashlight traced the marks, and I paused to draw another arrow on the cracked surface. A sound broke the stillness. A faint scraping, distant but deliberate. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. The sound came again, closer this time, like nails dragging across metal. "Just the wind," I whispered, though my voice sounded hollow even to me. But deep down, I knew better. The wind didn't breathe, and it certainly didn't whisper. I pressed on, the tunnel narrowing as the wreckage grew denser. My chalk arrows glowed faintly under the beam of my flashlight, a fragile lifeline in the overwhelming darkness. The silence seemed alive, pressing against my ears, amplifying every heartbeat, every shaky breath. Then I saw it. A faint glow up ahead, unnatural and pulsating. It bathed the wreckage in a sickly green hue, casting long, jagged shadows that danced like specters. I crouched behind a rusted sedan, my pulse hammering in my chest. The glow came from a breach in the tunnel wall, a jagged hole leading to God knows where. And then I heard the first groan, low, guttural, and wet. It reverberated through the tunnel, bouncing off the walls and filling the space with an unearthly resonance. I gripped my rifle, the cold metal grounding me as panic clawed at the edges of my mind. The groan was followed by movement. Shadows shifted at the edge of the green light, figures shuffling with an unnatural gait. They were slow, but their presence was undeniable. The dead had found me. I backed away slowly, marking another arrow on the car beside me. My hands trembled, the chalk slipping slightly, leaving a jagged streak. The sound of shuffling feet grew louder, accompanied by the occasional clatter of debris being kicked aside. Suddenly, the beam of my flashlight caught something new. An old, skeletal figure slumped against the wall. Its bony fingers clutched a piece of chalk, a series of faded symbols scrawled around it. My stomach turned as I realized the meaning. Someone had been here before, and they hadn't made it out. A louder groan snapped me out of my thoughts. The shadows were closer now, the green glow revealing more figures. Their rotting faces twisted into grotesque masks of hunger, their eyes hollow but somehow filled with intent. I turned and ran, my boots pounding against the concrete. The air grew heavier, the tunnel seeming to close in around me. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming as if the darkness itself was devouring it. I stopped just long enough to mark another arrow, the motion frantic and desperate. Then came the whispers, soft, almost playful. They danced at the edge of my hearing. They weren't human, but they mimicked the cadence of a voice, taunting me. "Keep going," I muttered, forcing my legs to move. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became a cacophony. Shadows darted at the edges of my vision, quick and fleeting, like predators stalking their prey. The tunnel split ahead, a fork in the path. My earlier arrows pointed left, but the whispers seemed louder to the right. I hesitated, the pressure of the moment crushing my chest. I marked another arrow, pointing left, and sprinted down the path. The groans followed, joined now by scraping metal and the sound of something wet dragging against the floor. I didn't look back. Looking back was a death sentence. When the tunnel finally opened into a larger chamber, I collapsed against the wall, my lungs burning. The chamber was littered with debris, and in the center, an overturned fuel truck loomed. Relief surged through me. Fuel. The reason I'd risked this nightmare. But as I approached, the whispers fell silent, replaced by a deep, resonant growl. My flashlight landed on a hulking shape in the shadows, its eyes reflecting the faint green light. It wasn't a whisperer. It was something worse. The growl sent a chill down my spine. It was guttural, resonating in my chest like the roar of some ancient predator. My flashlight flickered, and I instinctively backed away, my boots scraping against the gritty floor. The hulking shape moved into the green light, its grotesque form finally revealed. It was massive, easily towering over me, with a bloated, sinewy body covered in patches of decayed flesh. Its limbs were long and jagged, ending in claws that scraped against the ground. Its head turned slowly, hollow eyes glowing faintly, locking onto me with a horrifying awareness. I didn't wait. My instinct screamed at me to run, and for once, I didn't argue. I turned and bolted back toward the tunnel, the sound of the creature's claws tearing into the concrete behind me. Its growls turned to guttural, rasping shrieks that echoed through the passage, drowning out my frantic breaths. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, every turn a blur of darkness and fleeting chalk marks. My chest burned, every inhale ragged and shallow. I risked a glance back and regretted it instantly. The creature moved unnaturally fast for its size, its grotesque limbs propelling it forward with horrifying precision. The whispers returned, louder now, their mocking tones overlapping in a twisted chorus. I pressed on, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I dodged fallen debris and shattered pipes. The walls seemed to close in, the narrow space amplifying every sound. I reached an intersection, the familiar sight of my chalk arrow pointing left giving me a sliver of hope. I veered into the marked path, the tunnel sloping downward into a tighter corridor. The air grew colder, the stench of decay stronger. My ears strained for the sound of the creature, but all I heard was the pounding of my own heartbeat. I stopped to catch my breath, pressing my back against the wall. My hands shook as I pulled out the chalk, marking another arrow. The simple act felt like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't completely lost. The whispers had faded, but the oppressive silence was worse. A faint scraping sound returned, steady and deliberate. I lifted my flashlight, the beam shaking as it illuminated the corridor ahead. Something moved at the edge of the light, small, quick, and darting between the shadows. It wasn't the hulking creature, but something smaller. A whisperer. Panic surged, and I gritted my teeth, gripping my rifle tighter. The whisperer darted closer, its gaunt, skeletal frame barely visible as it moved with inhuman speed. Its eyes reflected the light, cold and calculating. It was toying with me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I fired. The shot roared through the tunnel, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the whisperer as it twisted out of the way. The bullet ricocheted off the walls, the deafening sound disorienting me. When I lowered the rifle, the whisperer was gone. The growl returned, louder and closer. My stomach dropped as the heavy thuds of the larger creature's approach echoed behind me. Trapped between two horrors, I forced my legs to move, sprinting deeper into the tunnel. The passage widened into another chamber, this one littered with rusted machinery and toppled storage containers. I stumbled inside, frantically scanning for an escape route. My flashlight caught a ladder bolted to the far wall, leading up to a hatch partially obscured by debris. I didn't think. I just moved. I climbed the ladder, each rung groaning under my weight. The growl grew louder, and I glanced down to see the creature entering the chamber. Its hollow eyes locked onto me, and it let out an ear-splitting roar, charging toward the ladder. I reached the hatch, shoving the debris aside with trembling hands. It barely budged. My heart raced as the creature slammed into the base of the ladder, the impact nearly knocking me loose. I braced myself, pushing harder. The hatch finally giving way with a metallic screech. I scrambled through the opening, pulling myself into another tunnel above. The hatch slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberating through the narrow space. I sat there for a moment, gasping for air, the adrenaline leaving my body in violent tremors. The tunnel ahead was unfamiliar, my chalk marks nowhere to be seen. The faint whispers returned, distant but persistent, as if mocking my temporary reprieve. I forced myself to stand, gripping the chalk with renewed determination. Mark your path, I thought. You don't stop. Not until you're out. The new tunnel was narrower, its walls slick with moisture that glistened under the weak beam of my flashlight. My breaths came in short, sharp bursts as I marked another arrow on the wall, the chalk trembling in my grip. Every sound seemed amplified in the suffocating silence. The scrape of my boots, the distant drip of water, and the faint whispers that never seemed to leave. My mind raced with thoughts of escape. The hatch had bought me some time, but I knew it wouldn't be long before the creature below found another way. The whisperers, too, were out there, watching, waiting. I rounded a corner and stopped dead in my tracks. The tunnel ended abruptly, collapsing into a wall of jagged rubble. My heart sank as I realized I had no choice but to backtrack. My chalk marks were there, faint and glowing in the beam of my light. But retracing my steps felt like walking into a trap. Then I heard it. A faint rumble that grew louder, the sound of stone grinding against stone. It was followed by a guttural roar that shook the walls, dust raining down from the ceiling. The creature had found me. Panic gripped me as I turned and ran, the confined space making every step feel heavier. The tunnel shook with the creature's movements, its massive form crashing through whatever lay in its path. My flashlight flickered, the bulb struggling to keep up as shadows danced wildly around me. I burst into another chamber, this one larger, but just as foreboding. The floor was uneven, littered with debris and the skeletal remains of those who had ventured here before me. Among the ruins, I spotted an old ventilation shaft partially obscured by a rusted metal grate. The roar behind me grew louder, and I didn't hesitate. I pried the grate loose, the metal shrieking in protest, and crawled inside. The shaft was tight, the walls pressing against my shoulders as I dragged myself forward. My flashlight barely fit, its beam casting long, trembling shadows ahead. The sound of the creature crashing into the chamber echoed behind me, followed by its frustrated growls. It wouldn't fit in the shaft, but that didn't make me feel safe. The whisperers could. I pushed forward, each movement agonizingly slow, my pulse hammering in my ears. The shaft forked ahead, one path sloping upward while the other descended into darkness. My flashlight flickered again, the bulb finally giving out with a soft pop. I cursed under my breath, gripping the chalk tightly as I made a mark on the upward slope. Blind, I crawled forward, relying on my sense of touch and the faint, cool breeze coming from above. Time lost meaning in the dark. My hands scraped against the metal walls, the rough edges cutting into my skin. The whispers grew louder, no longer distant, but close, as if the shadows themselves were speaking to me. My head throbbed, each whisper burrowing deeper into my mind, filling it with doubts. You're not getting out. You're already lost. The dead don't forget. I clenched my teeth, pressing forward until I felt the shaft widen. The air grew fresher, tinged with the faint scent of soil. I reached out and felt an opening, pulling myself through with the last of my strength. I tumbled into a clearing, the weak light of dawn breaking over the horizon. The forest around me was eerily silent, the towering trees casting long shadows over the ground. For a moment, I just lay there, my body trembling, the whispers fading with the rising sun. I sat up, my hands clutching the chalk as I looked back at the dark hole I had escaped from. The faint sounds of movement still echoed within, a chilling reminder of what lurked below. Standing, I stumbled toward the wall in the distance, its towering silhouette a beacon of safety. When I reached the wall, the guards barely spared me a glance. I grabbed the chalk and scrawled the rule onto the concrete, my hand steady despite the exhaustion. Rule 17. Mark your path. Beneath it, I added, because the dead don't forget, and neither should you.